porch light was off when I pulled into the driveway at 6:47 in the morning. That was the first thing I noticed. My wife always left the porch light on when I was on a rig rotation. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. That was the deal with Coastal Energy Solutions out of Lafayette. She knew I sometimes drove straight from the helipad without stopping, and the light was her way of saying she heard the truck. 14 years of that routine. The light was always on. I sat in the driveway for a moment with the engine idling. Told myself maybe the bulb burned out. Told myself it didn't mean anything. I come home 6 days early because the platform had a compressor failure that cascaded into a full shutdown. They flew us out on a Tuesday instead of the following Monday. I hadn't called ahead because my wife's phone had been going straight to voicemail all week. She said it was a billing issue with her carrier, and I figured I'd just show up. Surprise her. Maybe take my son out for breakfast before school. His name was Caleb. He was 13. I let myself in through the side door and set my duffel down on the kitchen floor. The house smelled like coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. The kind of smell that means the pot was made hours ago and nobody turned it off. Laura? Nothing. I walked through the kitchen into the living room. Her car was in the garage. I'd seen it when I pulled in. So she was home. I checked the bedroom, the bathroom. I came back down the stairs and stood in the hallway and listened. The house was too quiet. Caleb's room was the last door on the left. I knocked once and pushed it open. The bed was made. Not the messy, almost made that a 13-year-old boy does before school. Properly made, like no one had slept in it recently. His backpack wasn't on the hook by the door. His cleats weren't on the floor. The half-finished model of a B-17 he'd been working on for 2 months was sitting on his desk with the brushes dried out in the jar. I stood in his doorway for a long time. Laura came out of the master bath in a robe, hair wet, and stopped when she saw me in the hallway. The look on her face, it wasn't surprise exactly. It was something closer to calculation. Like she was running through something in her head very fast. "You're home early," she said. "Where's Caleb?" She pulled the robe tighter. "He's at a program, a structured program, for boys his age." "What kind of program?" "He was struggling, Martin. After everything with his grades and the incident at school, you were never here to deal with it. I had to do something. I hadn't heard about any incident at school. I talked to Caleb 3 weeks ago and he'd sounded tired but fine. He'd asked me if I thought the Astros had a shot at the wild card. We talked for 20 minutes about baseball." "What incident?" I said. She started talking. The story came out in pieces that didn't quite fit together. Something about a fight, something about a teacher, something about a counselor recommending intervention. The details kept shifting slightly each time she repeated them, the way details do when someone is building them as they go. I walked past her into the bedroom and picked up her phone from the nightstand. "Martin." "What program?" I said. "Name, address," she told me. "Sunrise Pathways Youth Academy," she said. "Up near Denton." She said it like it was a private school. She said it like she'd done me a favor. I put her phone down and picked up mine and typed the name into the search bar. The website that came up looked like it had been built in 2009 and never updated. Stock photos of teenagers smiling in fields. A mission statement about discipline and character development. A phone number with a 940 area code. No licensing information I could find. No staff credentials listed. No address on the main page, just a contact form. I looked at my wife. She was standing in the doorway of the bathroom watching me. "How long?" I said. "About 3 weeks." 3 weeks. My son had been gone for 3 weeks and she hadn't told me. I drove north out of Houston on I-45 and then cut west on 287 toward Denton. 4 hours in normal traffic, less that early in the morning. I had the address she'd eventually written down for me on a piece of paper on the passenger seat. I called the number from the website twice. Both times it rang through to a voicemail with a generic greeting that didn't include the facility's name. I called my brother from the road. He'd been a county sheriff's deputy in East Texas for 11 years before he moved into insurance work, and he still knew people. I told him what I knew. He was quiet for a moment. "I've heard of these places," he said. "Not that specific one, but the model. They call themselves therapeutic boarding schools or behavior modification programs. A lot of them operate in a legal gray zone. Some of them are fine. Some of them are not. My son is 13. I know. Keep driving. I'll make some calls." I stopped once for gas outside of Corsicana. I sat at the pump with the engine off for a moment and thought about the dried-out brushes in the jar on his desk. Caleb had been building that model for 2 months. He'd shown me the progress photos over video call, little updates every few days. "Look, Dad, I finished the wing assembly. Look, Dad, I got the decals on." He'd been meticulous about it. The fact that the brushes were dried out meant he'd left them that way. He'd left in a hurry, or he hadn't been given time to clean up, or both. I got back on the road. The address led me to a property about 12 miles outside of Denton, on a county road with no shoulder. The entrance had a gate with a keypad and a small sign that said Sunrise Pathways, no other information. The fence line ran back through scrubby post oak as far as I could see in both directions. I sat at the gate for a moment, then pressed the call button on the keypad. A woman answered. I told her I was the father of one of the residents and I was there for a visit. She told me visits were not permitted without a minimum 72-hour advance notice and approval from the program director. I said I had driven 4 hours. She said she was sorry, but those were the policies. I said I'd like to speak with my son. She said phone calls were also scheduled in advance and limited to approved family contacts. I sat there with my hand on the call button and a very specific feeling growing in my chest. Not panic. Something colder and more focused than panic. I thanked her and backed out onto the county road. I drove to the Denton County Sheriff's Office and walked in at 10:15 in the morning. The deputy at the front desk was a young woman, maybe 25 years old, and I told her what I knew calmly and in order. My son was 13. My wife had placed him in a private facility without my knowledge or consent while I was working offshore. The facility was refusing me access. I was a legal guardian. She asked if I had documentation of guardianship. I had my son's birth certificate in my phone photos. I'd photographed all the important documents years ago, a habit from working in remote locations. I showed her our marriage certificate. I showed her a recent utility bill with my name and home address. She made a phone call. 20 minutes later, a supervisor came out and sat with me in a side room. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with a patient manner, and I could tell he'd had this conversation before. Not exactly this conversation, but something like it. These types of facilities are licensed under a different framework than traditional schools or treatment centers, he explained. Unless there's evidence of abuse or illegal activity, a parent or guardian voluntarily placing a minor in a private program is generally within their rights. I didn't consent, I said. He paused. Is your wife the child's biological mother? She wasn't. Caleb's mother had died of ovarian cancer when he was 7. I'd married Laura 3 years later. She'd legally adopted Caleb 18 months after that, at her request. Then she has legal guardianship, he said carefully, same as you, so she can put him somewhere like that without telling me. He didn't answer that directly. What he said was that if I had concerns about my son's welfare, I could file a welfare check request and a deputy would be sent to the facility to confirm the minor was unharmed. I filed the request. The deputy they sent came back 2 hours later. She said Caleb was physically present and had confirmed he was a resident of the program. She said the facility had produced his enrollment paperwork and there was nothing on the surface that indicated immediate danger. I asked where Caleb had said. She said he'd asked if his dad was there. I drove back to the facility. I parked in the county road and walked the fence line. The property was large, maybe 40 or 50 acres. Through the trees, I could see the roofline of what looked like several structures. I could hear, very faintly, something that might have been voices. I walked back to my truck and sat there. My brother called. He'd found something. A former employee of Sunrise Pathways had posted a detailed account on a private Facebook group for parents of children in behavior modification programs. He read me parts of it: lights out at 11, wake up at 5, work assignments in the facility's garden operation, which, based on satellite imagery he'd found, appeared to be a fairly substantial commercial greenhouse. The post described the work as mandatory and described conditions that were not comfortable. I sat there with the phone pressed against my ear and the afternoon sun coming in through the windshield. "I need to get him out," I said. "You need a lawyer," my brother said. "Tonight, not tomorrow." I drove to Denton proper and found a family law attorney who agreed to see me at 4:30 p.m. on an emergency consultation basis. Her name was not important. What she told me was, because Laura had co-guardianship, my son's placement was technically legal. To force an immediate removal, I would need to demonstrate either that the placement violated our shared custody terms, which we never formally documented in a court order, or that there was evidence of abuse or neglect meeting the legal threshold. "What's the threshold?" I said. She explained it carefully. Signs of physical harm, evidence of conditions constituting abuse under Texas Family Code, a pattern of behavior demonstrating the placement was designed to harm or deprive the child of basic rights. "What about the work?" I said. "Mandatory agricultural labor, a 13-year-old. She made a note. "That could be relevant," she said. "I need to know more. Can you get me anything documented? Photos, testimony from another resident or former employee, anything?" I thought about the Facebook post my brother had found. "Maybe," I said. I got back on the road. I parked outside the fence again as the sun went down. At around 7 p.m., I watched a group of maybe 12 kids walking in a loose line from the direction of the greenhouse structures toward the main building. They were moving slowly, the way people move when they're tired in their bones, not just their muscles. I watched until they were inside, then I drove to a motel in Denton and sat on the edge of the bed and called my wife. She answered this time. "Tell me exactly what you told them," I said. "Tell me exactly what paperwork you signed." There was a long pause. Then she said, "He was acting out, Martin. I couldn't control him. You're never home." "Tell me what you signed," she told me. The enrollment form had a section about parental consent that listed her as sole consenting guardian. She said there was a field for second guardian's information, and she had left it blank. She said the program hadn't followed up. I asked her if she understood what she'd done. She said she'd done what she had to do. I hung up. The next morning, I was back at the attorney's office when it opened. She had done some research overnight. Sunrise Pathways was registered as a private nonprofit. Their exempt status was based on a religious education classification. They had received one complaint with the Texas Health and Human Services Commission 18 months prior, a complaint about labor conditions, which had been investigated and closed without action. "Closed how?" I said. "Insufficient evidence," she said. "But the existence of the complaint is useful. It establishes a pattern of concern." She filed a motion for emergency modification of custody and an accompanying request for immediate welfare evaluation by a state-appointed investigator. Because Laura had failed to disclose the placement to me, the other legal guardian, and because of the omission on the enrollment form, we had grounds. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. I drove back to the facility and pressed the call button again. I told them I had retained legal counsel and that a welfare evaluation order was pending and that I would like to see my son. There was a long silence. Then a different voice came on. Older. A man. He introduced himself as the program director. He spoke in a measured tone about the therapeutic value of reduced outside contact during the early adjustment phase. He used words like integration and foundational work and behavioral recalibration. I listened to all of it. When he finished, I said, "My son is 13 years old. He lost his mother when he was 7. He builds model airplanes and he follows the Astros. He has never been in trouble with the law. Whatever paperwork you have, one of his guardians did not consent to this, and I will be in court on Tuesday morning." Another silence. "You're welcome to wait at the gate," he said. I waited. At 2:15 in the afternoon, a staff member came out to the gate, a woman, middle-aged, carrying a clipboard. She told me that the program director had reviewed the legal situation and determined that a supervised family visit could be arranged under the circumstances. They brought Caleb out 20 minutes later. He came around the corner of the main building with a staff member on either side. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and canvas work pants. His hair was longer than the last time I'd seen him. He was carrying his hands at his sides in a way that seemed practiced, controlled, not the way a 13-year-old normally carries himself. He didn't see me at first. Then he did. He stopped walking. I said his name. He covered the distance between us fast. Not running, because I think he'd been trained not to run, but fast enough that the staff members had to catch up. I put my arms around him, and he pressed his face into my shoulder, and I felt him shaking. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, she said you knew. She said you signed the forms." "I didn't sign anything," I said. "She said you knew and you didn't want me coming home for a while." I held on to him. "I drove 4 hours the morning I found out," I said. "I've been outside this cave for 2 days." He pulled back enough to look at my face, checking. "There's a man by the building watching us," he said quietly. I looked. There was. "I know," I said. "Let him watch." The visit was limited to 45 minutes under the terms the program director had set. When the staff member came to indicate time, Caleb gripped my arm. "I don't want to go back in," he said. "Tuesday," I said. "I will be in a courtroom on Tuesday. Do you hear me?" He nodded. He let go. I watched him walk back. The hearing on Tuesday was in front of a Denton County Family Court judge. My attorney presented the omission on the enrollment form, the complaint history with HHSC, and an affidavit from the former employee my brother had found, a man who'd worked at Sunrise Pathways for 8 months before leaving and had agreed to provide a sworn statement about the conditions he'd witnessed. The affidavit described mandatory agricultural work shifts of up to 7 hours, inadequate nutrition, sleep deprivation as a disciplinary measure, and isolation from family contact as a behavioral control tool. Laura's attorney argued that the placement was made in good faith by a concerned parent and that the facility held valid licensing. The judge listened to all of it. Then she ordered Caleb's immediate removal pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services. She awarded me temporary primary custody. She froze Laura's ability to make unilateral decisions about Caleb's placement or schooling pending the investigation's outcome. I drove back to the facility that afternoon with a copy of the court order. They brought Caleb out with his belongings in a black trash bag. His model paints were in there, still capped. Some clothes. His phone, which had been confiscated on intake. A worn paperback novel I didn't recognize. His cleats. He got in the truck and set the bag on his lap and looked straight ahead through the windshield. We drove for about 10 minutes in silence. "How bad was it?" I said. Not as a question, exactly. He thought about it. "The work was the worst part," he said. "In the greenhouse. It was hot. We were in there from 6 to about 1 most days. Some guys got dizzy. There was one kid. He was maybe 12. He passed out once and they told us he was fine, but they took him somewhere and he wasn't back at dinner. I kept my eyes on the road. 'Did they hurt you?' I said. 'Not like hit me or anything,' he said. They had this thing they called a reflection period. If you broke a rule or talked back, you had to sit in this room by yourself for hours. No books, no talking, just sitting. A couple of guys were in there for days, I think." He paused. "I was in there once, for 4 hours. Because I asked when I could call you. I didn't say anything. I thought you knew," he said. I thought it was like you agreed with her. That I was too much." "You have never been too much," I said. He looked out the passenger window at the flat Texas landscape going by. "The B-17, he said. "Did you see it? Did I leave the brushes in the jar?" "Yeah," I said. "You left the brushes? They're probably ruined. We'll get new ones." He nodded. He pulled his knees up and rested his chin on them, watching the road. The CPS investigation took 11 weeks. What they found at Sunrise Pathways was enough. Labor conditions that violated Texas child labor statutes, records of systematic communication restriction, evidence that at least 3 residents had been kept in isolation for periods exceeding what could be legally justified under any educational or therapeutic framework. The program director, a man named Not Worth Remembering, was charged under Texas Penal Code with child endangerment, multiple counts, 1 for each resident. He eventually entered a plea and was sentenced to 4 years, with the possibility of parole after 2. The facility was shut down permanently. Laura and I were separated within a month of the hearing. The divorce was finalized the following spring. The court, in reviewing the full record, found that her failure to disclose Caleb's placement constituted a material breach of her guardianship duties, and her legal adoption of Caleb was formally reviewed. She did not contest the modification of custody rights. She moved to Phoenix. We don't speak. Caleb has a therapist he likes, a woman about 40 who has a dog in her office that he's apparently very attached to. He goes every other Thursday. He doesn't talk to me much about what happens in those sessions, and I don't ask. That's the deal. He's 15 now. He finished the B-17 about 8 months after he came home. He started on a P-51 Mustang after that, and then a Lancaster bomber, and now there's a half-completed F-4U Corsair on his desk with the brushes properly cleaned and standing in the jar. The Astros had a decent September. We watched the last week of the regular season together on the couch with sandwiches and the dog. We got a dog, a 3-year-old rescue shepherd mix named whatever Caleb wanted to name him, which turned out to be Radar, and it was loud and ordinary and entirely unremarkable. I have been asked by people who know the story whether I blame myself for not being there, for taking the offshore work, for the 2 weeks on 2 weeks off schedule, for the years of absences that probably made it easier for someone to convince a confused and grieving kid that his father had moved on. I do some. I'll carry that. But here's what I know. When the compressor on that platform failed on a Tuesday morning and they put us on the helicopter early, I drove straight home. No stops, no phone calls to say I was coming. And when I walked into a house that was wrong in ways I couldn't name yet, I didn't talk myself out of it. I didn't accept the explanation. I didn't wait until the weekend or until I'd rested or until I'd thought it through. I drove north at 6 a.m. and I pressed the call button on that gate and I stood outside that fence until they brought my son out. That's the part I don't second guess. Caleb came into the kitchen last Saturday morning while I was making eggs. He looked at the pan and said, "Are those the ones with the cheese?" I said, "With the cheese." He sat down at the table and picked up his phone, and I slid the pan back onto the burner, and that was all. That was everything. I think about the brushes a lot, the ones dried out in the jar on Caleb's desk. He'd been meticulous about those brushes for months, cleaning them after every session, standing them upright so the bristles held their shape. And then one day he left them sitting in the jar with the paint still on them because he didn't get a chance to clean up, and nobody in that house cared enough to notice. That's what neglect actually looks like most of the time. Not dramatic, not loud, just dried out brushes that nobody dealt with. What Laura did had a logic to it, and that's the part that took me the longest to sit with. She didn't act randomly. She made a calculation, that my absence made her calculation possible, that the paperwork had a field she could leave blank, that a grieving kid acting out was easier to warehouse than to understand. Every step followed from a choice, and every choice had a consequence she didn't fully think through because she was only thinking about the short term. That's how most damage gets done. Not with malice in every moment, but with a long series of convenient decisions, and my part in it. I have to be honest about my part. The 2 weeks on schedule made financial sense. It made sense for years. But it also meant I was a voice on a phone and a face on the screen for long stretches of Caleb's life, and that gap was something someone was eventually going to use. I wasn't wrong to work. I was wrong to assume that working was sufficient, that providing was the whole of what a father does. Caleb needed me present enough that no one could convince him I'd moved on. That's on me. What I keep coming back to is this. When the helicopter landed and I had a choice between calling ahead and just driving, I drove. That decision came from somewhere. I don't think it was instinct exactly. I think it was the accumulated weight of knowing my son, knowing how his silences sounded different from each other on the phone, knowing something had been off for weeks before I could name it. That's a kind of knowledge that only comes from paying attention over time, and when it mattered, it was the only thing that worked. Caleb is 15 now, and he knows, not because I told him, but because he watched it happen, that when the world tells you something is fine, you are allowed to trust what you know instead. He watched me stand at a gate for 2 days. He watched me walk into a lawyer's office at 4:30 in the afternoon with nothing but a birth certificate photo on my phone and refuse to leave without a plan. He watched the man who was watching them turn out to be someone whose authority ran out the moment a court order existed. I think the real lesson isn't about bad institutions or bad people or broken systems, though all of those were present. It's simpler than that. It's about what you do when you know something is wrong and the path to fixing it is uncertain and expensive and exhausting. You either move toward it or you don't. You press the call button on the gate or you don't. You drive north at 6 a.m. or you find reasons to wait. Caleb came into the kitchen on Saturday and asked about the eggs with the cheese. I said yes. That's the whole story.